if the locality says it is inconsistent with the local comprehensive plan, it's an important provision. Private landowner says, I want to put an easement on my land. The government has the right to say no. Very interesting. But that's why we have to have the good government relations that we do have. And that's why we create these vision maps to show people this is where we're going to work. So everything that you see in this map that is highlighted or shaded in that green are where the local comprehensive plans have agreed that land conservation is appropriate. Mostly, it creates a green belt around the urban core. If you think about early feudal planning, I mean, we're going a long time back, feudal planning, they had green belts, right? They had the inner defense wall, then they had your farmland and the outer defense wall. So it was important to have your farmland close. And even today, when you go to Europe, they still have these green belt concepts. You can't build within this footprint outside of London. And so they're seeing these leapfrog events. Well, we have that. How do we execute it? How do we create that regional vision when it's individual county plans? So our vision puts together what you see here. And interestingly, this is polka dotted right now with a lot of different colors, but that shows where the conserved lands are as they exist today. And the different colors represent dark green being those that are either federally owned land or state-owned land. There's another shade of green that's hard to see with this. Those are private lands that are conservation easement that Capital Region Land Conservancy either had no formal role in or were done before we were constituted. And then you see these orange and red and purple ones. And those are the easements that Capital Region Land Conservancy has actually helped to put on the ground. In some cases, it's land that we actually went to buy and acquire to conserve. So that's our vision. And this was created in 2017. We're currently undergoing a new strategic plan, and I'll get to that at the end of the discussion tonight. But it's an important map because it shows what have we actually accomplished and is there real strategy to land conservation. So since we were founded, we hold 14 easements on our own. We co-hold 17 easements, including the James River Park System, and 8 with the Henricopolis Soil and Water Conservation District. And I was asked earlier tonight about our relationships with soil and water districts. And we have very good relationships, and it's an important strategic relationship with Henricopolis, Monacan, and the James River Soil and Water Conservation Districts. And co-holding easements is important because they are a government entity. A lot of people don't realize soil and water districts are a government entity just as much as the city of Richmond or Henrico County. They hold easements under the Open Space Act. Capital Region Land Conservancy, as a nonprofit, holds easements under the Conservation Easement Act, 2 separate sections of state code. But when you bring those 2 organizations together for a co-hold, it brings 2 different protective sections of the state code together, makes that easement stronger. And that's one of the reasons why we like to do those co-holds. But we've also facilitated over 13,000 acres of land conservation, and we're a nationally accredited organization. Now, one of the things that we pivoted in 2016 was this land acquisition strategy. A conservation easement really is just an agreement between a landowner and a land trust. The landowner holds their land, they get to continue to farm it, they can sell it when they need to sell it. And the land trust holds those development rights and extinguishes them by holding them in perpetuity. That requires a cooperation and voluntary act of the landowner. In our region, however, that voluntary act is not happening at the pace that we want to see land conservation. So we started to become more proactive in buying land to conserve it. We felt that if we became more of an active player in that market and competed directly with developers, green is green, where your money comes from and what you want to do, doesn't matter to the landowner. So we ultimately stepped into that role with the acquisition of Malvern Hill. And down below, you'll see we own over 50 acres down along the Appomattox River. We own probably more than 500 acres out near Deep Bottom along Route 5 in the Newmarket Heights battlefield area. And then we also own a couple of parcels in the city of Richmond that we're working to convert into public parks. So as we get into this presentation, I just want to show you a highlight of some of our recent projects in pictures. So I think most of you know the view that named Richmond. The view that named Richmond is now officially protected because we did 3 different projects. A lot of people don't realize that. You might know that we bought 5 acres down on the river called Dock Street. Well, there was Dock Street. That was a $5 million project, but we also got an easement donated by a private landowner. And y'all are going to kill me when I say this, but it is on a parking lot. And it has a BMP to manage all of its stormwater, but it is a parking lot. It extinguished 10 stories of development that would have been built right in the forefront of the view. So you have to ask yourself, okay, it's a parking lot and it has a conservation easement, but it was a view shed easement. And this is such a critical component of Richmond's identity. But the other pictures, you know, trail system. A lot of trails in the city are still privately owned. People don't realize that. How do we make sure that that is secure for public future access? And then I love this last picture down here, because you all have partnered with us and helped plant trees down along Warwick Road. That is a stream in South Richmond, and it's quite incredibly beautiful. And you could think that you were anywhere in Virginia in the Appalachian Mountains with that kind of a stream. And this is down in an environmental justice community that this property will eventually have public access trails through, so that people in the community can connect to other communities, but more importantly, connect to nature. So this is my favorite part of the presentation. Everybody know what 30 by 30 is? Have you heard about the fact that there are over 200 nations that have signed a pledge to conserve 30% of the Earth's surface by 2030? The United States didn't sign. The United States hardly ever signs these UN pledges. That's a whole nother topic. But there's this commitment. Now, President Biden did sign an executive order. And he says he'd like to see the United States conserve 30% of its land and waters before 2030. Well, here's the benchmark. We currently have 13% of our nation's land conserved and 19% of our nation's oceans preserved. Now, you can do actual conservation easements on oceans, meaning no more oil drilling, no more, you know, disturbances of reefs or anything like that. But most importantly is that number about the land conservation. To go from 13% to 30%. Think about that. That's more than doubling all the land that has already been conserved since they started the National Park Service over 100 years ago. Think about that. In 100 years, we're going to do equal in the next 5 years. It's a lot. It's a whole lot. How are we doing in our region? And this might be very small to read, but for our region, we're right at about 6%. Okay. And what's hard to believe when we look at this is that the city of Richmond is at 6%. It's the smallest landmass out there. So percentages are really good to kind of use to compare. When you look at Hanover County, which is the largest land area, it's under 4% conserved. And you think of Hanover as being farmland, right? It is the least conserved locality in our region. The most conserved locality in our region happens to be Charles City County. And it's closer to 8% for Charles City County. And you think about how scenic the Route 5 corridor is. So I brought this to show comparison. So here's Henrico County. And you can see the concentration of Henrico County's conserved land is all in that eastern area, right? That is the Malvern Hill, the Richmond National Battlefield Park, the Deep Bottom area. That is the work that we have been concentrating our efforts on, because today we're at about 6,000 acres of adjacent conserved land when you put it all together. 6,000 acres in one area, congruous, is very important for nature to thrive. And I don't know if you all have ever heard about these two professors at the University of Richmond. You've got Todd Lookingbill and Peter Smallwood. And the two of them co-edited a book on collateral values. And it is an international study of how battlefields have now contributed to the greatest biodiversity conservation efforts ever found on the earth. And they look at Antietam, but they're looking at the DMZ in Korea, and they're looking at the Verdun forest in France, and they're looking at Afghanistan. They're looking at these scarred battlefield lands that were so sacred after the war, or they were so damaged after the war that they left them alone. There's so much munition still in the ground in Verdun forest from World War I. They just walked away from it. And nature has come back and has taken over, and it has some of the greatest biodiversity now in the world. We're seeing that in eastern Henrico County. And a lot of people wouldn't really grasp that concept, except for it has been considered sacred ground for so long and protected by the community for so long, and now being placed into permanent conservation status, that it is supporting threatened and endangered species. It is an Audubon important birding area for the migratory birds who are coming from South America, going to Canada, and making that trek every year. All in Henrico. And a lot of people wouldn't imagine that. And then when you look at Chesterfield, you can see just Chesterfield, it is anchored by Pocahontas State Park. There's very little other land conservation happening other than Pocahontas State Park. That's about 10,000 acres at Pocahontas State Park. But we are proud to continue to partner with Chesterfield and to try to do more, particularly along the riverfront. But I will share this statistic because this is what we face every single day. When I go to work, this is the statistic that I think about. And that is every 30 seconds, a football field of land is going to have been converted. You know, it could be cut down and made into housing. It could be cut down and made into commercial strip malls. It could be cut down and turned into some other use that is not natural. Think about that. Every 30 seconds, what's going to be left? When is enough enough? This is what has happened in our region for the course of 400 years. This is the development threat. What you see in gray there, basically the conservation community has said, it's lost. Don't even try to conserve anything in that area. Everything that then goes into the orange and the yellow, that's at risk of being converted. That is what they call the development threat. That's your road infrastructure, your water, your gas, your sewer infrastructure that makes development and pushes it into this realm. Well, at the end of the day, what that has done is it has taken away farms and forests. And from 2001 until 2016, our region has seen the net loss of over 25% of its farmland for the whole region. And we're talking about Goochland and Powhatan and Charles City and New Kent and Hanover. In Henrico County alone, during this time period, the county lost 80% of its farms. That ends in 2016. Think about what's happened in the last 8 years. We in Virginia now rank 8th in the nation for land loss, for farmland being converted to some other developed use. Yet in Virginia, our #1 industry is agriculture. When, this is my question, I asked General Assembly members, when did we say we no longer wanted agriculture to be our top industry? That's what the Port of Richmond thrives, because there's an export of agriculture. The Virginia port down in Norfolk thrives because of the export of agriculture. So, big question, how are we going to look in the future? Top industry, agriculture. #2 industry, tourism. Why do people come to Virginia? Natural resources. #3, forestry. What's going to happen when there are no longer timber tracks near the Hopewell plant or the West Point plant? What will happen is what happened in Franklin, Virginia, and that is the plant closes. And then you lose 1,000 high-paying jobs. Why aren't we supporting land conservation of our timberland to support the jobs that are part of the plants? You got to sustain the jobs instead of chasing to get new jobs. Because those people who lost their jobs in Franklin, Virginia, some of them never got jobs again. That's part of the economic argument for land conservation. So, and this is a newer study, and I'll get to it in a second on the impacts, but if you're interested, there are other organizations that are now mapping land use cover. They're identifying farmland, forest land, impervious surface, and all this. And you can see from this map in orange, that is where our largest farmland is today. And it's pretty much along the rivers, right? It's pretty much those old established farms that date hundreds and hundreds of years. And there's so much incentive today to try to help conserve those farms and give them the resources that they need to preserve water quality along the river. So I mentioned some of this. I'm going to jump through these parts of the slides, but a conservation easement, it's a legal transaction. It's just a piece of paper, but it gets recorded in the courthouse. It's an agreement between the landowner and the land trust. It has to meet the comprehensive plan, and you have to be a qualified entity to hold it. So Sierra Club doesn't necessarily hold conservation easements, even though it's conservation minded, because they're not chartered to do so. And the IRS and the state code has pretty strong requirements about what a qualified entity is. So voluntary acts, one of the things that we always like to say about land conservation is that it is having a major impact on water quality. We talk about land conservation, but think about all the impacts and relationship that the land has to water. And I was at a meeting yesterday and they were complaining about the recharge of an aquifer and that the aquifer was going to go dry. If you get too much development on top of the Earth's surface, there's not enough land for the rainwater to get into the aquifer, right? This is what happened to Highland Springs. Highland Springs got overdeveloped and the aquifer dried up. History, right in our backyard, proven case. So there is a direct connection, not just to the aquifers and the recharges, but the discharge and the runoff into our streams and our rivers, and all the work that the James River Association and others do to improve water quality. They are looking to the land. They're looking at phosphorus and nitrogen. They're looking at sediment runoff. If we can conserve the land and put in these buffers, water quality improves. Historic sites, cultural sites, and we've done a lot with that with the battlefields, and particularly Newmarket Heights, where the U.S. colored troops have had their greatest victory. Working farms and public lands. And then for landowners, and I know there's some that might be interested in it, there are actually a lot of incentives for landowners. My parents did a conservation easement nearly 20 years ago. And it was because we didn't want to see anything done to the property differently. But that was our peace of mind. That's what motivated us to do it. There are a lot of other financial incentives, whether it's through federal tax deductions, or in Virginia, there's a very lucrative tax credit where you get about 40% of the gift value back as a tax credit that could then be sold and liquidated. And then long-term estate tax deductions and local property taxes. So I mentioned the comprehensive plan, and here's an example of what we do every time we do a conservation easement. We go to the county planning department and we ask for compliance of a conservation easement on this property for the comp plan. And they bring 2, 3, 4-page letters sometimes. That is them saying to us, yes, you can do an easement here. That letter gets recorded with the conservation easement. A lot of people don't realize why we go to that level of coordination with the local government, but it's because the state code has weird language. And you got to read these laws. I mean, they're really just frustrating at some points. The way that the code is written is it says that a conservation easement will be invalid, is the word, if it does not meet in all aspects, all regards, all aspects, with the local comprehensive plan. But it says a conservation easement will be invalid if it doesn't meet these standards. It doesn't say who invalidates it. Who has the right to say that easement is not a good easement? It doesn't say that. It's the weirdest language. Then you have to say, well, who could challenge the easement? Well, the local government could clearly challenge it because it doesn't meet the comp plan. So we ask for these letters so that when it is recorded in 2023, if somebody in 2050 looks at this easement and says, we want that easement gone, it didn't meet the local comprehensive plan. This becomes the evidence that it did. Because the comp plan gets updated every 5 to 10 years. So how do you know that it met the comp plan at the time of recordation, or does it meet the current comp plan? So that's very important. But here I'm just going to go through some illustrations of our local comp plans. Richmond 300, I hope a lot of you all worked on it. You don't really see much there for public open space other than what is as existing parkland. And there's certainly not much in South Richmond. Here you have the riverfront plan. You also have the James River Park System master plan. And again, at least in the riverfront plan, they started to identify places that they wanted to have conserved. And from this illustration, you will see Dock Street, you will see Mayo Island, you will see Brander Street, you will see Manchester Green, Predator Green. Those are all places that the city has said, yes, we want to see these acquired and turned into green spaces. Well, Capital Region Land Conservancy has already successfully completed Dock Street. We've already got a contract and are working with the city on Mayo Island. And we haven't announced it yet, but we have a contract on Brander Street. And I think it's fair to share with you all, that is the orange sliver on the south side of the river near the wastewater treatment plant that's owned by Norfolk Southern, and the Richmond Slave Trail goes across it. So again, here's a trail on private land. Nobody wants to see public access taken away from the Richmond Slave Trail, so we've worked to get a contract to buy that and transfer it to the city of Richmond. Henrico's comp plan. And you can see all that eastern section of Henrico, but they're updating their comp plan today. And I know some of you all have worked very hard on it, but that whole green section in the eastern portion of Henrico, that could turn yellow, that could turn pink, that could turn a different color, depending on how the citizens show up and advocate for their local comprehensive plan. And once it's on the books for 10 years. So it's very essential that anyone interested in land conservation work on those comp plans. So I'm going to share with you all one other tool. Has anybody individually logged into the State Natural Heritage Data Explorer? No. This is available publicly. And I highly recommend it if you're interested in knowing conservation values and what we look at to conserve on land. Anybody in the public can log into this. There are all sorts of categories that you can explore. You can see where are the ecological cores. in our region. These are places for biodiversity, for wildlife habitat, wildlife corridors that are still intact and are not fragmented yet. You can see where the Department of Historic Resources has layered cultural resources and the importance of it. You can look to see what are the most important agricultural lands in our region. You can look for water quality. You can look for forest cover. You can look for rare and threatened and endangered species. And it's all available to you all. It's one of the most robust mapping systems. It's got 27 different inputs to help the public identify conservation values. And I'll give you a sense of how we use this as a tool. You can go in and see where any conservation easement or eased protected land is. You can then click on it and see who the easement holder is, so that you would know if you wanted to see the protections of a particular place, how to find it. It's all public record. You can see where the top 10% of land in Virginia, according to the state, and this is in code, should be conserved. This map, it's called Conserve Virginia. This shows you where that model has said for our region, we need to conserve this land. It is in the top 10% of land in Virginia to conserve. Much of it is because of the historic and cultural battlefield areas. That's what the pink is. But you will also see that there are areas of ecological core. There are areas of forest conservation values. This map, just so that you know, this is the ecological core, but this hasn't been updated since 2017. And I can assure you that there's been a lot more fragmentation of it since then. And then, of course, forest conservation values. And we all know what's happening in the city of Richmond and the urban heat islands. And one of the things that I continue to argue, and I'm appreciative of volunteers like the Sierra Club who go and plant trees. But do you know how many trees you got to plant if you've cut down a 7-acre forest? Conserve the 7-acre forest if you're concerned about heat islands, if you're concerned about carbon or emissions or pollutions. That 7 acres is going to absorb a lot more than the small saplings and the 25 years it's going to take for those to hope to grow and survive and not die. So one of the things that we do a lot, and I'm getting into the segue with urban heat islands, is environmental justice. And I know Sierra Club is big on it, and I know it's been something that has been talked about a lot more in the last 4 or 5 years. We've been doing this since I was even on city council and trying to secure green spaces. But now it has become a much bigger initiative. Are folks familiar with Justice 40? So Justice 40 is, again, a presidential executive order that says now that 40% of all grants and contracts from the federal government need to be awarded to environmental and eco-justice, environmental and economic justice communities. This map shows you exactly where those are in our region. And it's pretty much South Richmond and Eastern Richmond. And if I had zoomed out a little bit, you wouldn't see anything else in the counties until you get to Caroline County, up near Doswell. Very interesting how that pops up there. But it maps, and we've seen the story, and we've heard these reports before, it maps with where we are lacking tree canopy, where we are lacking natural resources. And so here's where the urban heat island impacts for the city of Richmond are. And you can see, I'll just toggle back and forth. You can see those really dark red are right in those Justice 40 communities. Why aren't we conserving trees in those communities? It's a big question. The city council just approved another project to cut down another 10 acres of trees. And the developer won't pay taxes for 30 years. They incentivized it. That's what makes me scared. And here's the real statistics. And these reports are now just coming out. In the city of Richmond, between 2014 and 2018, I think that's the date range here, the city of Richmond had a net loss of 80 acres of tree canopy. They calculate how many acres of new trees got planted and how many acres of trees were torn down, and you get your net. So the city lost 80 acres of trees. And that means, not just forests coming down, that looks at, if you had parkland that had trees, and now it's just grass fields, that's taking out trees. Doesn't have to be converted to parking lots for the houses. It's taking away trees. But it's also looking at when trees got planted in parks, etc. Now, that's in the city of Richmond. Anybody want to guess for Henrico County? Over 1,000 acres of trees. And this isn't, working timberland. This isn't somebody who's going to cut down trees and plant it back in trees. This is permanent land conversion. We already saw what happened with farmland in Henrico. Now we're seeing it with the forested land in Henrico. And amazingly, what this new report has done is it's finally putting a dollar amount of economic benefit of trees for each locality. So in this example for Henrico County, that has for its entire land area, 48% tree canopy, it has an economic benefit of over $30 million annually. Otherwise, you're going to have higher pollution, you're going to have higher stormwater runoff, all the things that you have to then spend money to mitigate. $30 million annual economic impact from trees in Henrico County. That's a business. That's a big business. You tell me what data center is going to bring you $30 million a year. What did they say the casino was going to bring? I forget what the casino was going to bring. Was it 30 million? Chesterfield. And I'm getting close to my end on some of these things, but I want to highlight what we're looking at and trying to make economic arguments. So Chesterfield County, a $58 million annual economic impact for its tree cover. That's huge. That is huge. But during that time period, they lost 2,500 acres of trees. That economic impact is going to be in decline. And they're very close to the Hopewell plant. What about equity in the sense of public access to nature? People have been following the city's commitment to 100% of the city residents should have access to nature within a 10-minute walk. You know why it's a 10-minute walk? I see John shaking his head. Yes?
I guess lack of mobility.
So it's actually what the CDC says is the furthest distance that an individual is likely to walk to reach their destination. And it equates to about a half a mile, right? When GRTC is determining bus stops by law, they must service everybody within a half a mile by law in order to be federally funded. That's the access. So it's a CDC rate. And so we're now applying that to parks and open space. And we're evaluating sidewalks and connectivity and the like. Well, in the city of Richmond, 80% of the residents have access to a park, public land, within that 10-minute walk. And this map shows you where the remaining 20% mostly live. And how does that match up to our Justice 40 map and to our urban heat island map? You can conserve a forest, create a public access, and have so much benefit to the community. Comparatively, this is all brand new data. I'm so excited because we can finally go into neighborhoods in the surrounding counties. Anywhere that is considered urbanized, and there's a definition for that in the federal government, but urbanized communities, we can now start to look at what their access to parks and open space are. So as an example, 29% of people living in Short Pond can walk to a park. Compare that to 43% in Lakeside. And I will tell you, some of these statistics get really, really bad. Mechanicsville, 4%. We did a project in South Richmond. This project now, this is Warwick Road, and I did this because you all have kind of embraced this area. But this property that we have conserved will now provide access to 2,700 residents who previously did not have access to a park or green space. 2,700 people. We can talk about, let's go conserve 5,000 acres out here. If we conserve 10 acres here, the human impact is multiplied. And that's what we're really excited about in terms of our equity work and being able to connect people to nature. And the demographics are here. This is all off of the Trust for Public Land. And so we decided that we needed to take equity work where equity was most needed. And one of the things that we partnered on was down on the Appomattox River. And I know you all have taken a tour down there, but it's an incredible piece of land right on the river. We bought property, about 40 acres, that is in Colonial Heights, Ettrick, and Petersburg. And in Ettrick, we doubled the number of people who could walk to a park. Doubled, just by acquiring 40 acres. And I will tell you, of that demographic, the health outcomes were very low. And that's one of the reasons why the Appomattox River Trail is such an incredible project. And what people saw in Eastern Henrico with the Capital Trail and health outcomes is now being targeted to be replicated down along the Appomattox River in Petersburg and in areas of low health outcomes. And people will want to get out, but it's a different kind of trail. It's not going to be what you see in the James River Park System trail. It's going to be a paved trail. It's going to be about 12 feet wide. It's going to have a lot of open visibility. People want to feel safe. They want to be in nature. They want to feel safe. So we have to make sure that we're meeting people where they are to give them opportunity and access. Capital Region Land Conservancy, as I mentioned, we're going through a new strategic plan. And this is a glimpse of what we're now talking about. So one of the reasons that we were formed was because nobody would hold the James River Park System easement. There was no local land trust serving the Richmond region. There are still communities without a local land trust today. And part of what we're evaluating is how can we then serve those underserved communities? Petersburg, Hopewell, Prince George, Dinwiddie, Amelia, Cumberland, Louisa, Fluvanna, parts of Caroline, and King William. Those are all areas that are currently underserved by a local land trust. And so what we've done is we put together a drive time map. And you can see we were serving the far western portions of Goochland, and it would take up to an hour to get there. But we could get to Petersburg in 30 minutes. Seems logical we should expand to Petersburg. Seems logical we should be expanding to portions in Dinwiddie and in Prince George, because we were already servicing communities that were much further away. So we're evaluating, and this is part of our goal to grow and to begin to serve more of these communities that today are facing that development pressure that has only been expanding out of the city of Richmond. And so somebody asked us, well, what does that future look like? Right? Well, now we've defined a new footprint of where we will do our work. But strategically, what are we looking to do? Always, we want to connect water quality. So anytime we can improve the Appomattox River, the James River, the Chickahominy River, the Pamunkey River, as long as we can improve water quality, we'll be there. But there are so many other new goals. And what I'm showing you is a new wildlife corridor that has been mapped by the state. And this is to do two things. It is to recognize where development should be limited so that nature can still move around in nature. Animals get trapped, right? We can't have trapped habitats. We need connected habitats. Second, and this is the real reason behind this, is under climate change, sea level rise, temperatures rising, animals and plants have to adapt. Where are they going to be migrating and how will they get there? The wildlife corridor is anticipating that and is saying this is the most logical progression for these plant and animal aquatic species to move. And they can't move very fast, but we need to allow for it. And so what you will see is that it connects from the Nottoway River with the Appomattox River through Amelia and up through Chesterfield and Powhatan, and it crosses the James River out near Cartersville into Goochland and continues up to the Blue Ridge Mountains. This is a very important corridor when you think about future generations and you think about the extinction of species that will be occurring because of climate change. And there's another warbler that is about to be listed on the endangered species list, and its major habitat is down near the Great Dismal Swamp. There's been so much development pressure down there that the species are almost extinct. Another area, and I'm excited about this, but it doesn't impact us significantly, but it opens up a whole new source of funding. So Charles City County and New Kent County and Prince George County and even portions of Chesterfield are part of what is now the Virginia Security Corridor Sentinel Landscape. Anybody familiar with the Sentinel Landscape? This is where it's gonna blow your heads off. Okay. The Department of Defense is spending money to conserve land. That's hard to believe. But I told you that some of our most important biodiversity areas are former battlefields. It's a weird mental connection when you start thinking about these things. But they're looking at it as protecting their military installations. If there's too much development around it, they're going to close it. I grew up in Virginia Beach. Oceana was threatened for closure because there was too much development around it. That's a huge loss of jobs. Nobody wants to give up those government jobs. So they have now created this security corridor to help buffer Fort Lee, or Fort Greg Adams, to help buffer down at Fort Eustis, to buffer up at Quantico, and it has become this major corridor, but it overlaps with all these conservation purposes, longleaf pine restoration efforts, marsh migration with sea level rise. They're putting all this together, and it's in the name of national security. Norfolk Naval Base has a national security interest in what's happening on the Pamunkey River. It's fantastic. And what's even more fantastic about this new designation is that the Department of Defense federal money can be used to match the Department of Agriculture federal money or the National Park Service federal money. It's kind of like its own little thing out here. But if we're going for grant monies to conserve land, if you get a federal grant, typically you'd have to go find a match from a state grant or private philanthropic sources. Having this designation means that a project in Charles City County could theoretically have 100% federal funding for land conservation. That's pretty good. Makes me feel good about our military all of a sudden, right? But these are new initiatives, the wildlife corridor, the Sentinel landscape. These are things that we're watching to see where is the money being put for land conservation and for what purposes. And then it's having the conversations with the landowners. We're really, really proud to have conserved 13,000 acres since we were founded in 2005. Problem is, we're at 6% for our region. Nationally, we're at 13%. They got to get to 30%. You think we can get to 30%? Show of hands, realistic.
Sure.
Okay, Lee, be bold, raise your hand. Now, here's what I'm going to ask. I'm going to start counting down, and I want to see people raise their hands when I get to a number you feel is realistic for our region.
By 2030.
by 2030. 30, 25, 20, 15, 10. I see a lot of 10, 5, well, we're already at 5, right? So most people got your hands up at 10. That's our new goal. That's what we think. Let's stretch. Let's get to 10% from 6%. Well, you know what that equates to on an acreage basis for our region? 65,000 acres. 65,000 acres. That's 25 acres a day between now and 2030.
You can do it.
So I share with you, we have a high risk of development, land conversion, loss to forest land, loss to farmland. We have a high need for increasing public access to the outdoors and to nature. How are we going to get there? And who are our partners to do it? Capital Region Land Conservancy is the local land trust doing it every day in this region. There's no other land trust every day working in the Richmond region. We are constantly trying our best. And we bring forward projects that we think the community wants to see done. And I want to hear from you all if we have time. I'm sorry, I might have talked too long, but I want to hear from you all. What are your priorities? Where can we be working that meets your goals and objectives? We know we have to work to support the county's goals and objectives for the comp plan, but ultimately it's you citizens who inform the comp plan. It's you citizens who should be informing your local land trust and our priorities. So thank you all very much for your time, and I'll take some questions. I don't know, Aileen's got her hand raised.
So please, if you have a question, hit the microphone, and there are a bunch of questions on the chat.
Oh, there are, okay.
Yeah.
So my question is, the goals for land conservation of 10%, 25%, is that before 2024, or can realistically we could do 25% after 2024 once all the political seats change and we get new, more progressive thinking, conservation thinking elected officials?
So I think what you're going to see with this, Aileen, there are so many competing needs, right? And part of what we just saw with Richmond City Council is that they approved basically cutting down these trees in the name of affordable housing, right? We know we need affordable housing, right? There's an argument for, well, we need jobs, or we need this, or we need that. At some point, my hope is that the planners and that the local elected officials will say, okay, before showing me that you want to go cut down these trees, show me why this brownfield site is not suitable for your redevelopment. Get rid of the vacant parking lots. Get rid of the underutilized sites that are boarded up. You know, work to do the infill before you go after the greenfield. Because once you go for the greenfield, you're not going to get it back. And this is the issue with, I think the counties are beginning to see, and they've put a different spin on it. But, you know, some of these housing communities that are the inner burbs, they were built in the 60s and 70s. And they're getting to a point where, as housing inventory, they're old. They need a refresh. The communities near them need a reinvestment. The counties are trying to figure out how to reinvest in them. What happened in the city of Richmond was there was a lack of investment. And so those places just were somewhat abandoned. We need not to abandon them, but we need to come back in with resources and say, this is our priority area before we start allowing for conversion elsewhere. And that, to me, would be the easier approach. And I've got some questions here in the Zoom. Okay, somebody's saying Zoom will update. Land conserved by Richmond as a city due to decisions made in the 70s restricting annexation has a very limited amount of land, about 90 square miles. Conservation efforts, in my opinion, need to focus on the riverfronts. And I think that's a very poignant argument that we do need to focus on our riverfronts. We also need to focus on those streams and waterways that connect to our riverfronts, right? Think about Rattlesnake Creek. Comparative stream, but it also has the opportunity to bring neighborhoods to the river with trails. You think about Goods Creek over near Oak Grove and Bellmead communities. Again, opportunities to connect people to the river via their neighborhood streams and waterways. So I do agree with that premise. Now, I will say a lot of folks think that the annexation created this kind of landlocked city and we can't expand any further than that. But if you look in South Richmond, there are huge opportunities. There are huge opportunities to conserve 50 or even 100 acres. Challenge is that a lot of people are reserving it for some other use. Question is that the best use? How do we value highest and best use? Sometimes it is as green space. So I appreciate that question. Does 13% conserved figure include lands held by private organizations such as the Nature Conservancy? So the answer to that question is yes. So when we own land as land trust, it is considered protected. If we were to sell that land, gift that land, because we're an accredited land trust, we are required to protect it before we transfer it. So it comes with a conservation easement if we no longer own it. So it does get counted. And are there any other questions in the room? Yes, Andrew.
If you were to go out and actively talk to farmers in rural areas, in the areas we want to conserve?
So the answer to your question is yes. My colleague Jane Myers, for example, tonight is at the Monacan Soil and Water Conservation District for a farmer's resource workshop where the district invites the extension office and they invite the Soil and Water District, Land Trust Community, Department of Forestry and others to come, and they give kind of 10-minute presentations for each organization just to kind of update landowners. We do that on a regular basis. We have in the past, we have not done anything recently with this, but we have in the past sent targeted mailed invitations to landowners to come to our workshops to learn about land conservation. We've done that specifically with our riverfront owners, right? Somebody who owns land on the James River, we want to talk to them. Somebody who owns land on the Pamunkey River, we want to talk to them. So we have done that on a targeted basis. And then I would say from an urban ag perspective, we have received a grant and we've been working with VCU. They hosted a recent meeting with urban agricultural producers to talk about where can we do better site location identification of privately owned land that would be best suited for urban agricultural purposes inside the city of Richmond. Urban agriculturalists, unfortunately, just like so many others, land tenure is their biggest problem. They don't own the land. They're on borrowed time. And so how do we create a security for them if they're going to make all this investment into making it a farmstead? How do we create that land tenure? So that's something that we've been looking at. So on an equity basis, that's the component, but I think your question is, yes, we want to target those. The biggest challenge for farmers, twofold. National average age of a farmer, anybody got an idea? 65. 65. Average age. So many farmers, their net worth is in their land. They can't retire without basically selling the land that they've lived on and worked. So how can you make retirement affordable for a farmer and keep that land in working farm status? That's where the conservation easements come into play. But if you're asking them to donate 60% of the value, you're asking them to forgo most of their net worth, and they can't afford to do that. That's why having grant money to help come in and purchase the easement is so important, and one of the ways that we've started to navigate the federal funding systems. Yes, Bruce.
Just briefly, I know you can't talk specifically about things you currently have in negotiation, but any particular just general areas, directions you see we should be looking for your response based on TV in 2024 for, any big things that might be coming up for general areas.
So the riverfront's always important. Any way to enhance and increase the land for the James River Park system is important. 2 million annual visitors in that park system, and the acreage hasn't really increased. And it's only going to get more and more populated, which is a challenge. So how do we diffuse that? How do we create new accessible park spaces that have similar experiences like the Appomattox Riverfront? Wouldn't it be great if Petersburg could get 1 million visitors a year? Right? So we are looking in that. We're also looking specifically in the park equity component for the city of Richmond. We're continuing to look at parcels that are privately owned that could, if they were conserved and made as a public land, would increase the access to the remaining 20% of Richmond's population. And then that wildlife corridor. We've got about 6 projects right now in Powhatan County that are all within that wildlife corridor. And the nice thing is, kind of like what has happened at Malvern Hill and our extension off of that, is while it might be 50 acres, 160 acres, 70 acres, the more you do that is adjacent to each other, you can get to those 1,000 acres, 2,000 acres, 5,000 acres. But it's how to eat the elephant, one bite at a time. And it takes a long time. And the pace at which we're doing it, I would say we're not satisfied. But we only have so many resources and staff time to accomplish what we want to do in such a short amount of time. Is there more questions from online? Let's see here. Question. With the shift in leadership in Henrico, this may be Aileen's question, how will CRLC approach those localities about pursuing a greater commitment to land conservation? How might the Sierra Club and groups like the Partnership for Smarter Growth work with CRLC to advance land conservation in our region? And that question was from Glenn Bessett. So thank you, Glenn. So this is one of the things that I'm sad, but one of our founders ran for board of supervisors in Powhatan County. He came up very short. He ran up as an independent, and I think the Republican Party swept Powhatan. But land conservationists are running for office. And in fact, in Goochland, Jonathan Lyle ran unopposed in the 5th district and was elected. And Jonathan is the chair of the Monacan Soil and Water Conservation District. He's the one who wanted to work on a co-hold agreement with us to conserve more land in Goochland. 3 of the 5 board of supervisors in Goochland ran on, we need to conserve our rural character. This is Goochland. We're seeing that. New Kent County, we're still working through and hoping that they will finally adopt this, but the New Kent County Board of Supervisors had a work session, and the county manager presented a proposal, $125,000, where the county would help underwrite the costs for landowners who wanted to do conservation easements on their property. Doing a conservation easement is not inexpensive. It can cost $25,000. So the county is saying, well, we will put up $25,000 per landowner who wants to do it. They want to see land conservation incentivized in New Kent. And in New Kent County, if you're not aware, it was the fastest growing population center in the state for the last 2 consecutive years with an annual population growth of 8%. They have a huge threat of conversion of their farmland. And they're right next to the Hopewell plant. So they recognize the need for land conservation and are saying, we're gonna help those landowners who otherwise could not afford it. So we are seeing now new commitments in places that are Republican, that are Democrat. And that's one of the things that I think has always been the hallmark of land conservation, is it doesn't matter which party affiliation you are. It has had general consensus. You know, it was Donald Trump as president who signed the permanent authorization of the Land and Water Conservation Fund and the full funding of $900 million annually to pay for land conservation efforts nationwide. So it's not necessarily Democrats or Republicans, but I do appreciate the question.
Can you describe work you've done or would like to do with tribes?
Oh, good question, Daryl. So, a couple of things. The tribes, I've really enjoyed working with the tribes. The tribes have really, in recent years, created new opportunities. One of the things, and I've been serving on Virginia's United Land Trust for a number of years. One of the things that the land trust community advocated for was to change how the state did its grant criteria to make tribes eligible for direct grant funding. It used to be that a nonprofit or a government entity could. And the way that the Attorney General's office said, well, the tribes aren't government entities. They're not sovereign to the United States, but they are sovereign, right? So that created a conundrum. So the way that the state code was changed for the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation, for the Virginia Preservation Trust Fund and other funds was that tribes are now enabled to be applicants for funding. I don't want to say too much. I think I'm okay to say this. I've told Chief Adkins that I don't want to go around tooting CRLC's horn. But these applications to submit for funding is not necessarily intuitive. And we've had great success as a land trust in applying for funding. And so with the Chickahominy tribe, we were a ghostwriter on a grant that just was funded at $300,000 for them to buy 200 acres along the Chickahominy River on the New Kent side at Providence Forge, right at Long Bridge and Route 60. They're going to be able to repatriate that as tribal land. And I will tell you, when the application was written, there's a lot of history in Virginia and Providence Forge. I don't know if people know a whole lot about Providence Forge, but it was founded as this religious community and they took the land. And then by the time of the American Revolution, that's where Lafayette crossed with his troops. So he went to Yorktown. And then during the American Civil War, that's where Jeb Stuart rode his cavalry around Richmond. And it was like all this extra history, which for grant people, they love, they check the box. It's not tribal history. And I said to Chief Atkins, I said, look, we got to include it because it's going to score well for your project. But it doesn't say anything about you. Can you put your voice to this? He did it so well. He said, after our land was taken from us, this occurred. And after the land was taken from us, this occurred. And after the land was taken from us, this occurred. So he could tell all that subsequent history. But every time he reinforced that the land had previously been with the tribe. So that is an example of how we can help the tribes, but I very much want the tribe to have full credit for the vision. They've identified the land, they've been working with the landowner, they needed a vehicle to get the funding. But I love what the Chickahominy tribe has been doing very much. The other thing I would just mention, and this is where I think the tribes could use a lot of support, but every time there's a development project or there's some road project or something, and it requires a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers. Now, granted, the Supreme Court has changed these Waters of the U.S. ruling, and so that's going to change what gets reviewed by the Army Corps of Engineers. But anytime that it goes to the Army Corps of Engineers, there's mandatory tribal consultation. The tribes don't have the resources to respond to every single project. So they're gonna disturb wetlands over here. Technically, they'd have to go get tribal consultation. The tribe's not gonna really be concerned about the 5-acre Sheets project on Staples Mill, because is it really land that they're familiar with from a tribal perspective? So they're not gonna necessarily weigh in on each opportunity, but they can. How do we support the tribes in weighing in on these consultations? It's an opportunity. And all these projects have mitigation requirements from the Army Corps of Engineers. We got called from something in Charles City County and they said, there's $50,000 in mitigation money. Do you have a conservation project in Charles City County? And I said, we have a couple of conversations, but I can tell you $50,000 isn't going to do much. Right? Why is the mitigation so low? Nobody's really in the conversation. Yes.
How do you decide what you'll accept for a donation? My husband and I donated about 5 acres of land on a cove in Maine, and it was
Beautiful.
something that the Maine Coast Heritage Trust wanted. But like east of Mainline, I see a piece of land, I think it's in conservation, but it's on a street, but it's beautiful to see woods there instead of a house.
Yeah.
So how do you decide what?
So we have, anybody can apply for a conservation easement on their land. Anybody, it's open process. The first step is that we write a letter to the locality and ask, is it consistent to place conservation easement on this property with the comp plan? If they say no, we really can't pursue the conversation because of the way that the state code is written. And in fact, we've had several projects declined in Henrico County. Just being honest, including a letter I got today. Didn't meet the comp plan. That's the control that the localities have over landowners who even want to just conserve their land and do nothing different with it. Then it goes through our desktop review, which includes looking at those databases that I was showing with how do you evaluate the most important land in Virginia to protect? How do you evaluate water quality? How do you evaluate forest conservation values, ecological cores, cultural resources? We do that evaluation. By law, you have to meet at least one of those conservation goals to be able to qualify for a conservation easement. If your property doesn't have any of those, we have to say no. Most of the times you can find one. What is scenic value? Well, scenic value from a road. If the public has the view of your property and it looks pretty, it could have a conservation easement. So most of the times checking that box is not difficult. The question then often comes down to, and I hate to put it in these terms, but a lot of landowners who want to put an easement on their property will sometimes see the cost of doing it as being prohibitive. Many landowners can recover their costs because of the tax incentives that the state is offering. So it'll take 2 years to get these tax credits liquidated where you have cash in your account, but it's going to more than compensate you for the cost of getting it done. Some landowners can't have the upfront cost to do it, to get to that end. We're trying to explore ways, and we have a grant right now where we're working with 2 landowners in a Justice 40 community in Richmond to conserve their land. But we have to balance a lot of different competing needs. We only have a staff of 3 full-time people and 2 part-time people. This year, we're probably going to do more than 10 projects, and that's pushing us to our limit in terms of our staffing capacity. We wanted to do 20 projects. We'd have to double. If we're going to only do 10, then you have to figure out which of these 30 applications can we accomplish, and the prioritization becomes a challenge. and we're doing our strategic planning, question was asked of the board, what do we say no to? And that was a really, really difficult question to answer. Because some people say, I want to see acreage. I want us to get to our 10% goal of acreage. But then there's the other side of it saying, I want to have a personal impact on these people's lives. And you're not going to do that with acreage. You're going to do that with proximity to population. How do we balance those competing needs in prioritizing our work? But I think the simplest question is, we really have not said no to many. We've done easements, parking lot, right? It was 3/4 of an acre. But if there was a 10-story building right on East Main Street in downtown Richmond, who cared what happened on Dock Street? This property was before Dock Street. So it would have been worthless to try to save the other. And so that became a priority. So there's different ways of looking at it, and we try to be creative. But I appreciate you donating your land in Maine. I went to college in Maine. It's such a beautiful, and the coast is incredible, and the shore and all the tourism that goes there.
There's not much access to water. So everything really appreciated.
That's the same problem here. It's one of the state priorities is to increase access to our rivers for the population. Joe.
We have one more question.
And I'm looking here in the chat to see if there's more questions. Wildlife corridors. There's in Goochland, there's been controversy about the county development plan. The motive has generally been an instinct against growth. My worry is that the lack of a plan makes environmental damage more likely, but I haven't been really confident and I don't have any resources to cite. Can you shed any light? This is where we've got to do more from an advocacy standpoint. Tree canopy. There's a state code section that says that if you are in Planning District 8, Northern Virginia, Planning District 8, we're Planning District 10 in Richmond. If you're in Planning District 8, the local government can adopt an ordinance that requires a financial contribution to offset the loss of trees from a development. And they can also require up to 20% of the site to preserve the trees there. It's only a state law applicable to one planning district. Oh, I forgot, Williamsburg gets an exemption too. Why does Richmond not get the same rights and privileges as another locality in Virginia? Dillon rule. We have to ask the General Assembly, put us in there, please. The city of Richmond would gladly pass an ordinance to require developers to conserve tree care, or to offset it with a contribution to a fund that can go buy some trees and conserve a forest somewhere else. But we don't have that enabling legislation, nor does Goochland. And what we're seeing and we're hearing, like for Hanover County does not have many parks that are natural parks. They got ball fields. Number one citizen survey demand is more trails and access to nature and the rivers. This is Hanover County. They did these cluster developments where it's like, well, you can now put all your houses here, but then you got to conserve the rest of this land. But all that land is owned by an HOA, and it doesn't really have any public benefit. And now they're kind of saying, well, we've conserved this land, and that's great, but what are we doing with that conserved land? And how are we going to fund the demand for these parks if we're not asking the developers to contribute to parks? And if you look at land planning, and I wish that more people understood history, but for the city of Richmond, the first 3 city parks, one of them was Monroe Park, and another one was Libby Park. It was 1851. They bought those properties to expand the city limits and to encourage residential development. You got the Fan as a result of Monroe Park, and you got Moore Church Hill as a result of Libby Park, 1851. By the 1880s and 1890s, it was done again. Bird Park was acquired before the neighborhood, residential expansion. Bryan Park acquired, residential expansion. Forest Hill Park acquired, residential expansion. The park acquisition strategy was what led the growth and the planning of communities. Now the developers are planning the communities. Where's the park consideration? Right? What we went from 100 years ago, we're no longer implementing. And it's like we've completely given away the public interest to the private interest. And at some point, maybe elected officials, maybe planners will get back from that abyss. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Parker, very much. There's so many fascinating tributaries of thought that come off of the topic land conservation. We've heard a few tonight. We wish we had time to hear more, but we had a fantastic speaker. And as with all of our speakers, we offer a $50 stipend and to any organization of their choice. And tonight it is going to the small but mighty Capital Region Land Conservancy.
Thank you all very much. And truly, $50 in our organization goes a long way.
Wow.
We are small and mighty. And when I started, I would just say this one last thing, and then I'll get off. You can pull the hook on me. But when I started in 2015, Capital Region Land Conservancy's annual operating budget was $65,000. The next year, we had a contract for $6.6 million to buy Malvern Hill. Why those people agreed to give us a loan, I don't know. But I'm so happy about it. And if we can continue to show, you know, the small but mighty, I think we can continue to accomplish great.
We're going to move into a few announcements here. The thing that comes to the top of my mind is the furthest of our programs off in time. Chief Atkins, who was just mentioned, is going to be our speaker right here in this space in April of next year. So please mark your calendars for that. Of the Chickahominy tribe, yes. And I'm supposed to stand in front of this thing. All right. I really don't want to. I really want to come out there because, you know, we referred to this obliquely earlier tonight under the topic of good news. And you all have talked about it with all your friends and everybody you know in the past week. As I drove here tonight, I thought about what was happening a week ago tonight. What was happening was a really, really good election. This is a good election, sure. And Parker made a good point. We are not a partisan organization. We want conservation champions. We want land conservation champions. We want climate champions in office. I believe that happened. I will also mention that the Falls of the James Group held forums and did endorsements for the Board of Supervisors in two counties near here. And those two counties had very, very good results. How does that look? That looks good. I don't know how much we exactly had to do with it, but a darn good outcome. Aileen Rivera in the back on our XCOM, she worked incredibly to set up the forum in Henrico County to contact the candidates. How many, before the election, how many, Aileen, what was the makeup of the supervisors in Henrico County?
We have 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats.
3 Republicans, 2 Democrats. Okay, that could change a little bit, right? Maybe, if we're really lucky. What is it going to be now? 4 Democrats, 1 Republican. Again, we are hoping for positive change from this. And the other county where Glenn Bessa spearheaded with incredible energy, the forum, the endorsements, the questionnaire that went out, because we don't just say we like these people because they're these people. We send out a questionnaire, we take into account the answers, we interview the candidates that fill out the questionnaire, and we make the endorsements. In Chesterfield, it was 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats. And you said, no, nothing could ever change in Chesterfield. Chesterfield? Get out of here. What is it now, Chesterfield, Aileen?
Democrats, 3 Republicans.
3 Democrats, 2 Republicans. There is such hope. And what was really beautiful was to meet the people who ran for these offices and see their commitment, their really great values. And a lot of them made it into office, a lot didn't. Some great people did not, but maybe they will next time. Yes.
There were some great independent candidates that aren't patient minded and about hard work and conservation, and they didn't make it, but they're still in the community working. So we need to give kudos to the independents that were running also.
Thank you very much, Aileen, for that reminder. And to consider, if you didn't hear it, everybody, on the Zoom, to consider the great candidates who ran as independents too. And at the General Assembly level, you know, it's too close for comfort, but it's a heck of a lot better than it could have been. And all of us, we have a great privilege. We live near the Capitol. We can go down there to that beautiful new General Assembly building. And how dismal would it have been? How dismal would it have been to go in that beautiful building if it was under the control of people who are going to despoil our natural resources? That's not the case now. Can I get a witness? All right, thank you. It is going to be beautiful. I can't wait for January. I can't wait. They can't keep us out of that building. What's that, Gustavo? Yes, elections in Richmond next year. Elections a lot of places next year. Don't make me think about it yet. But I'll say this also. When I talk about Aileen Rivera, I think it was a day after the election, she is saying, now we got to talk to the people who got elected. We got to tell them what our policies are. We got to hold a meeting with them. I think that was a day after the election. We're going to do it. We are going to do it. What a beautiful, beautiful time to be in Central Virginia. All right. Okay. Siobhan, do we have other announcements? We did. I swear we had other announcements. There is a hike coming up on a battlefield. Parker talked about battlefields. We have a hike on a battlefield. That's not the first announcement. All right. November 15th, is that still in the future? That's tomorrow. The York River Group has a virtual meeting about healthy foods for a healthy planet. That is a neighboring group, and Tyler Madison, who we all know, many of us know, is the chair of that group. That's the neighboring local group. They have a very cool virtual meeting tomorrow night. On Thursday night, we can give you something to do every night. On Thursday night, there is Thursday afternoon, a gas leaks webinar at 3 p.m. Electrify Now is the group putting that on. And we have links to this stuff. And if you sign up in the back of the room, please sign up. If you're not receiving a newsletter, you too can receive this beautiful color newsletter sent to your email. Sign up in the back of the room. Let's go. All right, am I supposed to move this? Also, on Thursday night, there's a community gathering and a public briefing about the Chesterfield gas plant at Spring Hill Suites in Chester, Virginia. I'm going to be at that. Gustavo is going to be at that. The community is going to be at that. This is another thing we now have hopes for, is to greater hopes to stop the gas-fired power plant that Dominion wants to build in Chesterfield. Absolutely the wrong way to go in 2023. That needs to be stopped. We're having a community meeting in this hotel, in the room next to Dominion's community meeting, where they're gonna talk about how great it is. So we're gonna talk about how bad it is. All right. Take a deep breath. All right. Virginia Organizing, a really good group, a really good organization. On this Saturday, November 18th, is at 1 p.m. is having a rally and meeting outside the Richmond chapter at Forest Brook Apartments. We have our own Siobhan Peacock has worked with them on this issue. They work on tenants' rights, evictions, things like that. Now it's the hike. Okay, also on this Saturday, a hike at North Anna Battlefield Park at 9:30 a.m. And we are, it's a beautiful time of year to get out in nature. So please join that hike if you would like to. We are 4 weeks from tonight. We'll be here in this room for a potluck holiday dinner. We'd love to see everybody here. There's a sign up in the back also for that. You can sign up, specify what you'd like to bring to that. We have great fellowship at that. We're going to we have invited and anticipate both of our Green Giant Award winners to be here for that. The 2 award winners for this year are Rodney Gaines of Virginia Community Voices and Agecroft Hall, because they put in solar panels to provide all of their energy needs. So we want to recognize that. Excuse me for a minute. I get dry. Talking, yelling, laughing. On New Year's Eve, well, let me say in all seriousness, we truly appreciate Congregation Orami for providing this space for us to meet. We started here in September. We're going to continue having meetings here every month through April of next year at least. And Congregation Orami has a New Year's Eve party on, yes, New Year's Eve. It is a party, it is a fundraiser, there is food, and there is a band playing. And so there's a cost of that. Tickets are $35 in advance, $45 at the door. You get food with that and 1 beverage, and you can purchase more of the same. So please consider spending some of your New Year's Eve right here. And when the new year starts, we will also be back here on the second Tuesday evening, where we'll have Danny Plogger. He is the executive director of Virginians for High-Speed Rail. And so another excellent speaker to start the new year. I think that's all I can take. I think that's all we have, unless anybody has a burning topic. I see a hand raised. Daryl Downing, take a microphone. Come on.
This is open to the public. The Virginia Conservation Network's annual General Assembly preview is December 2nd, 9 to 12. If you go in person, breakfast is included. And it's a great way to find out what's planned for the 2024 General Assembly session. You can also attend remotely if you'd rather not get out of the house that morning. And they're holding in-person meetings all over the state. A couple Sierra Club groups are hosting, so it's really neat. It's lots of access, and it gets. So if you go to the physical location in Richmond, you'll be there with a lot of other folks other than Sierrans. So it's a chance to meet and network and so forth. So December 2, it's on the posted today to the Falls of James group calendar, so you can find the links and additional information there. I'm sorry, was there a question? Richmond is the nearest one for us. Where? Oh, I'm not worried about it. It's not too soon. Yeah, I don't know. Click the link. It's all there. It's all, I don't know, off the top of my head. Sorry, I'll email you, John.
Aileen. And thank you, Daryl. Another, it's important to be informed before we go to the General Assembly.
Yes, just a quick announcement. Oh, sorry. Just a quick announcement while we were meeting tonight. Of course, there were many meetings happening, but if you can please check out the recording, Henrico Conservation Action Network hosted the Virginia Sierra Club and the Piedmont Environmental Council on the subject of data centers. And that is a huge subject for us. Goochland's getting it, Henrico's getting it, Louisa's getting it. So please, when you get a chance, go to Henrico Conservation Action Network and check out the webinar they had tonight. It's very important. Data centers are going to be a huge issue for us. So just check it out. Thank you.
Thank you, Aileen, and thanks, Aileen, for reaching out to Parker to be our speaker tonight. Thanks to Nancy Patterson, who brings and organizes refreshments for each of these programs. And thanks to Siobhan Peacock, who behind the scenes makes all of these programs happen. It would not happen without Siobhan. And thank you all for coming out. Thanks to the folks who joined us on the camera, and have a very wonderful evening.
I love your energy.